So it is now with great pleasure that I get to introduce tonight's speaker, Meg Greski. Meg earned her degree in livestock science and management from West Virginia University. She has traveled extensively in the United States. She told me 43 different states in her mission to learn and teach the secrets to agricultural profitability. This experience included interning with Greg Judy, custom grazing and trading cattle for 7 years in Western New York. She now lives and works in Oklahoma. Meg is a regular contributor to On Pasture, has appeared in Stockman Grass Farmer, and has been featured in Working Cows podcasts. The title of tonight's talk is Grazing Tips and Tricks. Meg is presenting again tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. on the topic of pasture remediation and the do's and don'ts of high density grazing. So I hope you all get to join us again tomorrow night. So without further ado, let's welcome Meg Greski. So Meg, you can go ahead and start sharing your screen.
Okay, hello everybody. Good evening. Everybody can see my screen, right? Everything's working good so far, Rich?
Yes, we can see you and hear you clearly.
Okay. Well, tonight I'm really going to focus on a different take on agriculture than we usually hear about at a lot of these conferences. So this is stuff that is going to be super applicable right away that you can take home as soon as you get off this webinar and walk outside and start doing, instead of things that are going to take months or years and take large management changes. So before I go too much farther, I want to tell you about me and I want to get to know you. So as Rich said, I'm originally from New York State. I grew up around the Buffalo area, and that's where I spent the first decade of my time in the agriculture industry. I went to college at West Virginia U. I took livestock production and ag business. And then after that, I went and interned for Greg Judy, who is a mob grazer in Missouri. And that's where I learned everything that I know about regenerative management. And from there, my career in regen ag took off. And to this day, I am still so thankful to Greg and Jan Judy for giving me, at the time that I knew nothing, a chance. And they gave me the start to my career that I probably would never have had otherwise. So thank you again, Greg and Jan. So after that internship, I traveled around a little bit. I've worked in Montana and Texas and, like I said, Missouri, Oklahoma now, and a few other places. I have been to 43 states in my quest to learn about agriculture. So I have seen a large variety of environments and different cultures when it comes to livestock production. So, but I'm going to definitely talk specifically about the Northeast and about New York right now, because that's where I'm from and that's where you guys are all from. Most of you probably, right? So I spent 7 years running my own operation in New York State called Rhinestone Cattle Company. I started out by custom grazing cow-calf pairs, and then as my operation evolved, I switched to being a seasonal heifer developer. So I would buy open heifers in the spring, and then I would get them with a bull all summer and sell them pregnant in the fall. I learned that going seasonal was a lot easier due to the climate in New York State and the amount of snow that we get. So and my operation continued to evolve, and for a number of reasons I moved out of New York State, and I'm now in Oklahoma learning more about the cattle business. It's been a diverse set of experiences, and I'm so glad that I moved and got to meet so many new people and do a ton of fun stuff. And that's where I'm at right now. I got to do some work this past summer with the partners of Understanding Ag, which is Alan Williams and Ray Archuleta, Gabe Brown, and Shane New, and a number of other really knowledgeable, well-known people in the regenerative business. So I'm really thankful to them also for the time that I got to spend with them and what they taught me. Okay, well, anyway, what I was saying is that this is some important stuff that at the time that I first learned it, I didn't think it was being publicized enough. So I'll be interested to see how many of you have already heard of it versus haven't. I got to figure out how to get to my next slide here. Okay, there we go. So like I was already talking about a little bit in my introduction, what I'm not going to talk about here is big, far-reaching management changes that take a lot of capital and a lot of time to accomplish, and is going to require a massive restructuring of what you're doing. There's plenty of those talks that go on, and I don't want you guys to go home from this or to log out from this and think, man, that's great, but it's going to be a massive undertaking to try and take any of that advice. This is going to be stuff that you guys can use today. You can log off, you can put your boots on, walk outside, and go put this information to use. I'm not going to be talking about stuff that requires a bunch of capital expenditures, not stuff that requires you to have a lot of physical strength, and stuff that is applicable to a lot of different species, different farm sizes, and different management cultures. And so hopefully you can all find some stuff to relate to in here. I do specifically refer to cattle a lot because most of my work has been in beef cattle. I have also spent some time doing artificial insemination in dairies. And so I've been around dairy farms a little bit. And I just spent a summer herding on horseback, about 300 or 400 sheep and goats on rangeland. So I've spent a lot of time with sheep and goats too. I spend a little bit of time with everything. So the first tip and trick that I want to share with you addresses the question here, are your cattle getting enough to eat? How do you know? You can figure that out by checking on rumen fill. Now the rumen is the part of the digestive system that has the largest capacity, and that's where the animal holds and ferments all of the forage that it eats. And you can see that where the rumen is on the back of this cow. It's right between the rib and the hip bone and just below the spine. So there's a triangular spot that I have circled on the screen there, and that's where you're going to look at this. You have to make sure that you look the way that this cow is oriented, with her head on your left, and that you're looking at the right or the left side of the cow, because that's where the rumen sits, on the left side of the cow. If you try to look on the right, you're not going to see the rumen. You're just always going to see a sunken triangle over there just because of the way the cow is built, and that's not going to help you at all. Now, making sure that the cattle always have full rumens is worth multiple body condition scores on breeding stock, and it's also worth a significant amount of gain on growing stock. So you want to check this every day, every time you see your cattle. Now this cow, same cow as the last picture, this is what you want them to look like. This cow's rumen is full, and she is definitely not going hungry. She's got about as much grass stuffed into her as she could possibly eat. So there is no depression and no shadow and no sunken spot where in that spot that I had circled with that yellow oval. Now this one, we had a little bit of a feed problem here. See how in that spot on the upper back toward the hip where there's that dented shadow? This animal went hungry for a little bit. Not to the point where it's a terrible problem, but this animal ran out of feed. So if you are making temporary fence paddocks, you would want to make your paddocks a little bit bigger, or if you were a little late getting out there today, you want to move them a little bit quicker. Maybe shorten up your graze period by a few hours. It's more of an indication that there could be a problem coming than it is an actual big problem. And when you're looking at a whole herd of cattle, there's always going to be slight differences between the animals. Like you'll see a lot of them full, some of them a little bit dented, and then if you see one looking like this, these are going to be a massive, massive problem. If you just see one or two of these in your herd, those could be animals that have nutritional problems or health problems, or they're old and just poor doers. If only one or two of these cattle are like that, they're going to be your low performing cows that you want to cull. But if you see a significant number, 25% or more that are like this in your herd, that is an issue, and that's a management problem that you need to address. So this cow here has gone hungry for 24 hours at least. And so you can see where that rumen has been totally collapsed and is empty. And so she definitely needs to be fed. If you're seeing cattle like this, you definitely need to make your paddocks bigger, move them sooner, or give them more feed. So this is something that you can do within a split second every time you see your herd. Evaluate between 5 and 10 cattle and can tell you how you're doing. in terms of providing feed. Now you can balance that with how your pasture looks to decide how big or small to make your paddocks going forward. Or if you have set size paddocks, you're going to have to just adjust the time that the cattle are in there. And so what you're going to do when you get home or when you log off here, you can just walk outside and look at the cattle with the heads to your left. Remember, always heads to your left. Now, once you have decided whether or not your cattle are getting enough to eat, there's still the issue of whether or not they're getting the right stuff to eat. There's an easy trick to take care of that one too, and that is examining manure piles. The proof is in the poop, as Greg Judy used to say. A lot of these pictures are ones that I took at his place. So this is what a cow pie is supposed to look like. In this, the animal that dropped this one is eating an ideal balance of protein, energy, and fiber. That doesn't mean it's a 1-to-1 ratio of all those things, but it does mean that the rumen is getting the correct feed ingredients in the correct ratios to use everything that is being ingested and to function at its maximum productivity. So when you have a pile that looks like this, like a pumpkin pie consistency when you spread it, and it has these nice concentric ripples, it's about 1 inch or 2 tall, and it holds its shape really well, this is a well-balanced diet. And so this cow, you couldn't do any better diet-wise for this cow to help her perform. You don't see any undigested long hay fibers or anything in there. Now this is a problem. This is not what you're looking for. It looks like horse manure. This happens a lot when you're feeding hay or when you're in a drought situation or you're on mature forage. This is just too much fiber and there's not enough sugar and not enough energy in the feed that they're consuming. You might also have a protein issue. On grass cattle, protein is not usually a problem in the Northeast, but energy and protein need to go together. Even if you're feeding enough protein and the animals are not getting enough carbohydrate or enough energy, the animals are unable to digest that forage and break down the lignin and the carbohydrates that they're eating. So everything has to come together. Now, if you're feeding hay in the winter and you've tested it and it's decent quality hay, I mean, it's going to be dry feed. The manure is always going to stack up a little bit. I wouldn't worry too much about it, especially with dry beef cows or cows that are in late lactation. But if this is happening in the middle of the summer, then that's a bit of an issue. So if that's happening, you want to maybe put out some energy and protein lick tubs, put out some supplementation, or just try moving your cattle more often and not letting them eat so far down on the grass plant. Because the most energy in the grass plant is located in the tips of the leaves, which we'll get to that a little bit later. Now, here's the opposite side of the spectrum. This is spring runny diarrhea manure. This is not a good thing either. A lot of people regard this as normal because, the grass is just washy and growing quick in the spring. But the animal that dropped this has a stomach ache and is not performing to its maximum ability. This can negatively impact stocker gain because this animal is getting too much protein. And it has an upset stomach. Do you feel good when you have an upset stomach? Probably not. Do you accomplish a lot? No. So this is a problem that needs to get fixed too. Now, what's the problem with an animal getting fed a lot of protein? Protein is a good thing, right? Causes high performance. But not necessarily if you have too much protein. Now, this is what happens when an animal eats a normal amount of protein that is well balanced in the diet. The protein goes into the digestive system, and in the rumen, it becomes ammonia. When the protein molecule is fermented in the rumen, the amine group comes off, and that goes into the kidneys and becomes urea. And then from the kidneys, it is excreted in urine, and it comes out as urea, and it does not enter the bloodstream. It exits the animal. Nothing bad happens. So the animal is able to handle that protein load. And your blood pH is neutral. Your milk urea nitrogen levels are within an acceptable range. And so everything's good. But when the animal eats too much protein that cannot be handled by the rumen and cannot be excreted fast enough, some of it exits through the proper channels, but some of it does not. And when it gets into the blood, you have all kinds of issues that can result. Oxygen uptake in the lungs can be impaired, and the animal can start to exhibit signs of heat stress because it's unable to transport oxygen the right way, because the blood chemistry is off. As a result, you get poor feed efficiency because rumen chemistry is not right either, so the digestion efficiency is thrown off. The animal is stressed and not metabolizing food the right way, so you end up with low gain or low milk yield. Like I said, rumen chemistry is off and becomes alkaline. And in extreme cases, the animal can fail to breed or get bloat. So none of those are good things. Now, how can we figure out, aside from testing blood urea nitrogen or milk urea nitrogen, how can we figure out really quickly if we have excess protein? Well, first of all, you're going to be seeing that runny manure. And second, you can test the pH of the cow's urine. This was a trick that
Meg,
I learned from Greg Judy. So you can get these pH test strips either online or from like a pool supply store. But you have to make sure that they are within the range of 7 to 9 pH. That's about the range you're going to be testing, because bovine urine is not usually acidic, and I'm not sure what would happen if it was. But you will test from 7, which is a neutral pH, all the way up to into the 8s. I've never seen it go higher than the 8s. So by the time you get to the high 8s, that's a pretty big deal. So how you do this is you go out in the pasture or out into the barn, and if your cattle are tame enough to let you get right behind them, you just wait for one to pee and stick the strip into the stream. But if you have beef cattle or some wilder stock, that won't let you do that. It's a good idea to do this first thing in the morning when the animals are first getting up. First thing that they do when they get up is that they poop and pee. So you stop and wait for one to pee, and then watch in the grass or in the bedding where that lands, and run up and stick the strip in it as soon as the animal walks away. Now make sure, if you're doing this in the pasture, that you're not getting dew, that you're actually getting urine. So you want to test between 3 and 5 cattle, especially during times when the grass is growing really fast and you have high pasture protein. And if the results are between 7 and 7.9 pH, that's fine. If you're getting up into the 8s, you might want to start thinking about mitigating that extra protein that's going into the animal. And if you're getting into the high 8s, that's when you're going to have animals show performance problems, health problems, and won't breed very well. So this is how we're going to take care of the excess protein issue, or the manure consistency issue in general. Supplementing energy or protein if you have lumpy piles, or just start by moving the herd quicker to a fresh pasture and not making them eat so far down on that grass plant. If you're just letting them take the tips, that's where the energy and the sugar is in those grass leaves. But as you make them eat farther and farther down the plant, that's when the protein is concentrated. So they're going to ingest more protein if you make them graze shorter. That's according to Mark Bader, who was a really brilliant nutritionist and started running Free Choice Enterprises Cafeteria Mineral. He was a contemporary of Greg Judy's. Unfortunately, isn't still with us, but I learned a lot from him, and it definitely would be worth it to look up his work. Again, his name is Mark Bader, Bader. So after you test the pH of your cattle and you decide that you have an excess protein problem, the easiest thing to do, besides changing your grazing to keep them eating just the top of that plant, would be to throw out just a little bit of dry matter in order to balance their rumens, which would be dry hay or straw. You really don't need very much. With Greg's herd of 200 head of cows, we only put out 1 or 2 small square bales a day, and that was all they needed. So the cattle will pick at those bales as they need it, and they know how to balance their own diets as long as they are given the materials to do so.
Hey, Meg.
Yes.
There was a question early on about rumen fill and how it applies to sheep too, if the same hours. I don't think we have to go back or anything like that, but so the question was, for the rumen fill and the time that you posted for the cows, does that same time reflect the sheep, and would you see the same same dent and such in the sheep, or would you have to kind of do a feel test, or how would that work?
That does work with sheep and goats the same way it does with cattle. I spent a lot of time looking at sheep and goats a couple summers ago, and as the dent in their side gets bigger and bigger, that's when they're getting hungrier and hungrier and having gone longer without feed. They can go about 12 hours because what they will do is when you turn them out, they'll go fill up and they'll get a number of hours worth of feed filled in their rumen, and then they will go and lay down overnight and digest it all and be ready for more in the morning. Sheep and goats will double or triple in width when they are full versus when they are empty. So it doesn't take much time to spend with them to observe when they're empty versus they've had a lot to eat. You'll turn them out and then come back in an hour or two, and man, those sheep and goats are twice the size they were. So when the sheep and goats start looking like they're about to burst, they're pretty full.
Okay, and then now for the manure testing, based on feed intake and whether there's too much lignin or too much protein, how would you score sheep and goat manure the same way for the cows?
Yeah, sheep and goats definitely don't have the same manure consistency as cattle, so I don't think that would work as well. I'm not as much of an expert on sheep and goats, and so I don't want to give anyone the wrong information. But I'm sure that a Google search or talking to an extension agent would be able to give you some more information about how to evaluate sheep and goat manure, because I know you can do it. But there is some crossover. I don't want to say applicableness because that's not a word.
Right. Okay, well, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to start talking a little bit about genetics now. I mean, there's so much genetic information out there these days. And you could spend hours going through sale catalogs and bull catalogs with EPDs and listening to the breed associations about what you should be breeding for and reading tons of articles and going to tons of talks. But which cattle are actually your best? When you go out and look at your cattle, which ones should you be keeping and which ones should you be selling? Which ones should you choose as replacements and which ones should be your herd bulls? There's an easy way to figure that out too. Select cattle for a hair coat Slickoff. Now this is a lot easier if you have cattle that do have some type of warm weather breeding in them, but Angus and Hereford cattle do this as well. This was one of Greg Judy's South Pole cows down in Missouri. There are two types of South Poles. There's ones that get heavy coats in the winter that have more Angus and Hereford breeding in them, and the ones that don't hair up as much, which are more Senepol and Barzona breeding. And those are two hot weather breeds. So the whole idea behind the Slickoff thing is that hair coat is regulated by the endocrine system, which also regulates every other function of the animal's body. And so if the endocrine system is working good and the animal is in healthy hormonal balance, everything else will be tied together. These are going to be the animals that have the best growth and gain. They will be the most fertile and have the highest libido when it comes to breeding. They will have a balanced temperament, so they're not going to be psycho. They will have good immunity and won't get sick and will stay healthier. And they will have good instinctive mothering behavior and things like that. So everything is tied together in hormonal function, and the hair coat condition is a great external indicator of how the hormonal function is working in an individual animal. So you want to select and keep the ones that lose their winter hair coat early in the spring and get rid of the ones that hang on to that nasty, ratty winter hair. So this is one of Greg Judy's bulls that is a good example of early Slickoff. None of that long matted winter hair is still on there. This would have to be about April. Now the time that you want to evaluate this is going to depend on region, but you want to do it as soon as the weather starts getting warm in the spring. This bull has nice oily skin, and that shiny oily coating on him of sebaceous fluid repels flies and is an indicator of a high gain animal that is not going to need a lot of intervention from you. Now this is the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm sure we've all seen this. This animal is a whole bucket of problems. A lot of this retained hair coat issue can be caused if you're not feeding the right mineral or enough mineral, or it can indicate a nutritional problem if you're seeing a lot of this in your herd. But if there's a number of cattle in your herd that look great, and there's some that look like this, it's probably not a herd management problem. It's probably just a genetic thing. So the way that we could utilize this is by going out in the spring at the time when cattle start to lose their hair, and watch over the course of a few days and put your cattle in 3 categories. The ones that slick off first, the ones that kind of are in the middle, and the ones that retain that hair coat into summer or don't lose at all. And only choose your breeding replacements from the first category, because hormonal function is highly heritable, and we don't want to keep breeding animals that need help and can't function under the conditions in which the rest of the herd thrives. Now, if you're daring, I think that you can single trait select for this, and all other traits will fall into place because they're all linked to the endocrine system. So I think that it can be one of maybe 2 selection criteria, and I'm just about to talk about the other one. So here's the other selection criteria that I really like to use. We're going to walk through a little bit of a calf comparison here. Which one of these 2 calves would you rather have in your trailer on sale day? The little one or the big one? Well, we all want the big one, right? Because they sell for more. Now here is the mothers of those 2 cows. Little calf, little cow, and big calf, big cow. Now you want this big calf, and you want the cow that made you that big calf, right? Not necessarily. I want to calculate the percentage of the cow's weight that she weaned, which is an indicator of how efficient she is in taking her feed and converting that into money for you. A small cow over here, she weaned that 450-pound calf, and that was 45% of her own weight. But that bigger cow, because she has higher maintenance energy requirements just to keep that big body fed and functioning, she only weaned off 36% of her own weight. But we still sell them by the pound, right? So you still want that bigger cow and bigger calf, right? Conventional wisdom says so. But let's look at this a little bit closer. Let's look at feed use. Getting that bigger calf would compensate for a bigger feed bill, right? You would think. For this little calf, its little mother, over the course of a year, at 4% consumption of dry matter by body weight, she consumed about 16,000 pounds of forage in order to give you that calf. Now, the big calf's mother ate 21,000 pounds of forage in order to give you her calf. Now, when we actually look at that on a pound per pound basis, that little cow only took 32 pounds of forage dry matter per pound of saleable calf that she gave you. In contrast, that bigger cow needed almost 40 pounds per pound of calf that she gave you. So that smaller cow is the better feed converter. And so she is making better effective use of your money. You might still be thinking that, yeah, that cow, the bigger one, eats more, but that bigger calf is going to pay for that feed bill, right? Here's the kicker. Here's where it all comes together. Carrying capacity. So let's say that we have a set amount of forage. So we have 43,000 pounds of forage on your place. Let's go with that number. That amount of forage can feed 3 of those smaller cows that each eat 14,000 pounds a year. So out of that forage, you can raise 3 of those smaller calves. Take those calves to the auction, 450 pounds each, and they sell for about $1.50 a pound. So you end up with a little bit over $2,000. In contrast, if you got them bigger cows, 43,000 pounds of feed can only support 2 of them. Now you've only got 2 calves. Yes, they sell for more, but you've only made $1,650 off that same amount of forage. So you got to ask yourself, which one of these bovine machines is going to be the most efficient converter of your set amount of grass into the most money possible? That's why I like to select for the weaning percentage of body weight. Now, there is a kicker to this. I was talking to Kit Farrow a couple months ago when I went out there to Colorado to visit, and we were talking about this weaning percentage thing. And he says, yeah, it's a great concept as long as you keep in mind the body condition score and the breed back of that cow. Yeah, it's great if a cow can wean 70% of her body weight, but if she's skin and bones at the end of that production cycle and she can't get pregnant again because she's so skinny and she gave all of her nutrients to her calf, that's not going to help you. So you need to make sure that she weans a high percentage of her body weight, but she is also stayed in acceptable condition to rebreed, and that she does rebreed on time. So this is a chart from Ranch Management Consultants. They're the folks that put on the Ranching for Profit School. Just a side note about them, they are starting to have programs in the East now, which makes me so happy because they used to only have their Ranching for Profit programs in the West. And there are a lot of farms and ranches and crop producers in the East that really need the information that they have. So don't be deterred by the title Ranching for Profit. If you're a farmer, a dairyman, a crop producer, a vegetable farmer, for heck's sake, anything that you raise, you can learn from this school. I highly, highly recommend all of you go to the Ranching for Profit School. I did not get paid to say that. I just went to their school and it opened my eyes to a lot of things. Anyway, this is one of the charts that they give you at the school, and this shows the comparison between what cows and animals of different sizes eat. So I have a couple highlighted over here. There's a 1,000-pound cow, and if she is pregnant and dry, she eats 1 animal unit of grass. And an animal unit is just an arbitrary measurement that we've come up with to be able to compare different sizes of animals, apples to apples. So let's just say that this 1,000-pound cow, when she's dry, eats 1 unit of grass. Now we go down to this 1,400-pound cow farther down the list, and when she is pregnant and dry, she eats 25% more than that small cow. And it really jumps up when both of them are lactating. The small cow only increases by about 60%, and that 1,400-pound cow increases by about 70% when she is lactating. So it's not apples to apples just based on size. Those bigger cows have greater jumps in nutritional needs throughout the production cycle. And those bigger cows also need to eat more even when they're not lactating. So I think this chart really shows it pretty clearly. And when you're evaluating carrying capacity on your land and you're trying to choose what type of animal to put on it, this growing steer and heifer chart, I think, also is really important, because it was a turning point in my business when I realized that I could run a lot more heifers on the same amount of pasture as I could cow-calf pairs, just because those heifers were smaller. Now, trick number 5, we already talked about the weaning percentage thing. Here's a few pictures. So this is one of Greg Judy's cows with her calf that is about 6 months old at that point. And look at how big that calf is compared to that cow. I just can't get enough of that picture. Now that's production. Another one at the top here, this high percentage cow, is one of Greg Judy's South Poles. That's her and her 6-month-old calf. You can't hardly tell which one's the cow and which one's the calf. And that cow doesn't look like a whole lot, does she? She's not particularly pretty, but man, she is functional. She has weaned a huge percentage of her body weight, and she eats very little doing it. Now on the bottom, this could be just any average commercial cow, and she is a lot bigger than that calf. And she's not doing a whole lot with all that fat that's on her back. It's not coming out the udder. So to wrap this one up, how to evaluate weaning percentage is that you would want to weigh your cows and calves at about 6 to 9 months of calf age every year. Even if you don't wean, I never actually weaned. I just left everything together and let the cows wean their calves naturally. You would want to do this calculation at around 6 or 9 months of age, because that's the point at which the calf really starts gaining under its own power, and the cow is producing very little milk at that point. So that's about the end of the cow's job, per se. And so you would weigh the cows and the calves, and then take the calf weight divided by the cow weight and multiply it by 100. And so that will give you the percentage of the cow's body weight that she has weaned in her calf. Once you get all that information, rank your cows in order of the weaning percentage. So put your high percentage cows at the top and your low percentage cows at the bottom. Now, this could be really surprising for some of you. The cows that you think are your really great cows may not be. And some of those cows that you kind of hate looking at might be making you a lot of money. You keep replacement heifers and bulls only from the top of that list, and you cull from the bottom up. Now, like I said earlier, pay attention to body condition score and timely breeding in those cows. If she has a really high score for weaning percentage, but she's not carrying that condition and she's not going to last, then that's not one that you want to keep. You'd be better off going with a more moderate percentage and keeping cows that are able to take care of themselves while they're weaning that calf too. Last one, guys, water quality. This is another thing that could have a heavy impact on stocker gain, up to about 1/2 pound per day. Observing your drinking behavior is important in your cattle, and this only takes a couple minutes a day, because you've always got to be going and checking your water tanks, making sure that they're full anyway. So if the cattle are sticking their noses down there and they're licking and playing with the water, that means that your water stinks and they don't want to drink it, and there's a water quality issue, because these anaerobic bacteria that live in water that isn't circulated create nasty smelling waste in the absence of oxygen. So water needs to be circulated in order to have high quality. How do we fix this when the cattle are playing with the water instead of just sticking their nose down there and drinking? This is a Greg Judy trick, making a chlorine tank floater. So you would start with a Gatorade bottle because it has a wide opening at the top, or any other plastic bottle with a wide opening. And you put a few rocks in there for weight, because if this thing is too light, the cattle will just grab it and flip it out of the tank because it's super fun to play with. You get the chlorine tablets for pools and spas from any pool supply store, and you crush them up so that you don't put a whole one in there. You don't need very much chlorine, and I don't know what would happen if you put a really big tablet in a really small tank. That might be a little bit too much chlorine. A small concentration doesn't bother them at all. And so you put that in the Gatorade bottle and poke some holes in that Gatorade bottle so that water can flow in and out, and then tie it to another bottle using a piece of string that is waterproof so it won't disintegrate. That piece of string right there is just a piece of polywire. And that other Pepsi bottle is just full of air. It doesn't have any holes in it. And what that does is it keeps that Gatorade bottle with the chlorine in it floating. So the chlorine is suspended in the middle of the tank. And that allows the water to wash over it and circulate. Now, if you just drop the chlorine tablet in the bottom of the tank, the water may not circulate well, and the chlorine won't be distributed as well throughout the water. Another thing you can do if your cattle are flipping this out of the tank and playing with it is you can tie a brick to that Gatorade bottle too, and the brick would sit on the bottom of the tank and help to keep that chlorine suspended in the middle. So here is a couple of pictures from my first farm in New York when I started out. On the left, this is what that tank looked like to begin with. You can't see down through it at all. It is so full of algae, and that's disgusting. But after just a couple of days with that tank floater in there, the water has really cleared up and you can see all the way to the bottom. So it's a lot easier than draining and scrubbing all of your tanks. And if you do drain and scrub tanks, it keeps the algae problem down and it's less of a project. Now, if you water out of ponds, please don't do this. I see this a lot in Oklahoma. This is just a bad deal, not only because the cattle are peeing and pooing in their water source, but because they are going in and out of that pond and they're pushing mud down in there. And eventually you're going to have to dig that pond out. And excavation is not cheap. So let's prevent this from happening. You can put a hot wire up to fence cattle out of the ponds in like a target shape, so that if you look down on the pond from the top, you would have just a small ring around the edge where the cattle can drink from, and then the rest of it is fenced off. You can do this with a temporary fence or a permanent wire, but I definitely prefer temporary because the water level will change based on how much rain you get throughout the year, and you want to be able to adjust that. So you put the fence post a couple feet out into the water so that the cattle can stick their head into the pond and drink, but they can't just go out there and hang out and play and swim. And so this will keep all the manure out of your water and will keep them from ruining your pond banks. Now, Alan Williams down in Missouri has taken this a step farther, and he has created drinking ramps in his ponds for his cattle. where they have the wire like this, but he has also put down some rock and gravel that they can walk on. And he uses a pretty big rock once you get into the pond under the water so that the cattle feel a little bit uncomfortable with those rocks poking their feet and they don't feel inclined to stand in there. And so this mitigates the mud issue when it comes to ponds. Another thing you can do to help increase water quality in a pond is to look into getting a circulator. Pond circulators can be solar powered or they can be wind powered. And they try to oxygenate your pond water so that your organisms that are not beneficial don't have such a good time growing in there. Keeps your water quality clear, and it can be really good for fish in stocked ponds as well. So in conclusion about water quality, watch when they're drinking. See if they're playing with the water or if they're just diving in there and sucking it down. Those chlorine tabs are really cheap, and one container of them lasts a long time. Make a floater, put that in your tank, and stick a hot wire in your pond. And if you have if you're kind of trying to make a wagon wheel shaped grazing plan around a pond like I used to, I just would string a piece of electric tape from one side of the paddock to the other if it met in the middle by the pond. So you don't even need to go around the entire pond. I just would use a piece of that electric tape to connect the two hot wires. Okay, so let's just review everything here as we're wrapping up. Our 6 tips and tricks that you can use as soon as you get off the computer here in terms of evaluating your grazing program. Monitor the gut fill. Make sure you look at those rumens with the head of the animal on your left side for cattle. There shouldn't be any depression in there. And for sheep and goats, I mean, they ought to get as wide as they are tall when they're full. Watch the manure piles for cattle. They shouldn't be runny and they shouldn't look like horse poop. They should be right about in between. Test the urine pH during times when you're worried about having excess protein. In the spring, watch which cattle slick their coats off first versus which ones do it late or not at all, and only choose your replacements from the slick, oily, shiny, nice hair coat group. And also weigh your cows and calves at about weaning time or whenever weaning time would be, and rank your cows based on weaning percentage of their own body weight. Balance that number with body condition score and rebreeding and put a lot of selection weight on that number. Lastly, observe drinking behavior in order to make sure your water is of good quality. So that's what I've got for today, folks. You can give me a call or a text or an email with any questions you might have or anything you want to discuss further. That's my phone number, which I do believe is going to be changing pretty soon to an Oklahoma local number. So if you can't get through to that, just talk to my email. Also, I have a YouTube channel where I put up a shorter abbreviated version of this presentation, and my one from tomorrow night is also up there. So all of my past presentations are on YouTube. And with that, I will start taking questions. And this picture over here is in Oklahoma. That's me and my horse, River, and my dog, Roger. So I just thought that was cute to put on there. And you can see a little bit of the land that I'm dealing with out there. A little bit different than the Catskills. There's very few trees. Anyway, happy to take questions now. And I also want to know if this is new material to you guys or if you've heard all this before. So let me grab my chat box. If I can figure out how to get the chat box up.
Well, we do have one question. You mentioned how having the slick coat during the summer, and the oils on that coat help with repelling of flies. But is there a relationship between, I guess I maybe answered my own question, the time of Slickoff and repelling of flies in that
Well, the earlier they
relationship?
get that winter hair coat off, the earlier they're going to have a coat that's not attractive to flies. And the ones that produce more oil and more sebaceous fluid are going to have the lowest fly load. Let's see, addressing coats with various breeds like the Highland cattle. And like I said, some northern cattle aren't going to get as beautiful and shiny and slick as those southern cattle, like that South Pole that I showed. But you should be able to tell looking at your Highlanders if it's new, healthy, shiny hair or if it's old, ugly, matted, dull hair. They really should not be retaining long mats of ugly hair that's discolored. So I mean, it does have to be considered on a per breed basis, but you will be able to see some difference in every breed on a seasonal basis. Now let me go back through here, make sure I haven't missed any questions in the chat. But yeah, the Slickoff thing definitely does apply to sheep as well. Hair sheep, wool sheep, goats. Maybe not wool sheep as much.
There was one question early on that from the picture of the last cow when you were talking about rumen fill, since that was the worst one, was there a backstory on that one? Do you know, or if, whether it was sick or whether they had just been moved to that spot?
This one actually is kind of a photo editing trick. That picture, I just took it and flipped it from right side to left side. So that is actually the right side of the cow in that picture.
Interesting.
Yeah, the right side of the cow will often look like that, especially with dairy cattle, because the rumen is not there. The rumen protrudes on the left side. So if you see something with that on the right side, don't worry quite so much about it. She was lacking a little body condition. Probably she was in heavy lactation at that point. I would have liked to see more fat cover on her spine and along her loin. But yeah, that was not her rumen.
Okay.
I just used that as like for illustration purposes.
Yep. Very cool.
And yes, the chlorine trick, I'm actually using that at the sale barn right now because I work at a stockyard down here. I got roped into cleaning all of these stock tanks that had disgusting amounts of algae in them. And after that, I decided I didn't want to do that again.